I've always been, of course, very into science, very into space. So my whole aesthetic has always been around being a little bit of an alien and a little bit of like a video game character. That's how the idea of creating a character came about. And honestly, might be the only reason why it works. It's because it is so bizarre.
Isabelle, thank you again for taking the time to hop on the podcast. I really do appreciate it.
I'm super excited to chat with you.
Me too. I've been going through your platform, IsoDope, and also YouTube, TikTok. I think your content is very interesting, and I'm excited to get into it.
Well, thank you. Were you confused by it?
Was I confused by it? I came into this podcast doing research, not knowing a lot about nuclear energy, and I saw your content first, which caused me to pay attention and dive deeper into it. So I don't know if confused is the right word, because I really didn't have that much to be confused about, because I didn't really know a lot about it. It was more like I saw you were doing something interesting and I wanted to know more about it.
Oh, I'm so curious. I mean, we can get into that later, but I'm very curious to see, how much you learned and if you changed your mind at all.
I definitely do want to get into that. I am in the process of, I don't even know if I had a hard line view for nuclear energy, because like I said, I didn't really have anything going on in my thought process besides the more mainstream pop culture depictions like Chernobyl and the video series, the HBO series, and just some basic kind of mythologies floating around about nuclear energy, which I now know are not based in fact. And so, yeah, I'm excited to definitely get into that stuff. I thought an interesting place to start would be the Rosetta space probe, because I heard on a previous interview that you actually made that probe your screensaver in the past. It may be your screensaver still.
Let me double check. You know what? I forgot what my screensaver is. Yes, it is.
So could you tell listeners what the Rosetta space probe is and what made you want to make the Rosetta your screensaver, kind of the story behind it?
Yeah, for sure. So the Rosetta it's funny because I wasn't prepared at all to talk about this, but let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
It was a space probe that was built by the European Space Agency. And it was launched to land on a comet, which was the first probe that was built with that purpose. And the comet, I can't remember now, but it was like, thousands of miles away and moving at an incredible speed through the solar system. And just the fact that a man-made object made it that far and had the precision to land on a comet, to me, was just such a symbol of what we are capable of whenever we are at our best as a species. So once you think about the magnitude of that, problem that people had to solve, and the fact that they did it, to me, it's just incredibly inspiring. And, whatever problem I have going on in my life seems very insignificant and seems very easy to overcome. So it's definitely a very inspiring image to me and a very inspiring project.
So it serves as a reminder, like you said, kind of how small we are in the scheme of things, and that there's not really, like, when you take a zoom out and you try to get some perspective, that it can kind of make things seem a lot less hectic on this planet than people make them out to be sometimes. Because I know I definitely do that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, we're confined to the narratives inside of our minds, and our problems are, at least for us living in the United States, are relatively small compared to some people in other places in the world. And I think that looking at something that humans were able to create, that achieved something that seems impossible just is very inspiring to me.
That's a good point, that America has a lot of opportunities, especially energy-wise, that millions of people, even billions of people around the world don't have. So I thought something I wanted to get into with you is your upbringing in Brazil and how you grew up, because I know it was in a small village in Brazil. And so what was it like growing up there, and how did you see the world in terms of what was available to you at the time? What was it like growing up in the village where you were?
You know, you don't know what you don't know. So for me, my upbringing was how the world was. I think that now looking back, you know, I learned recently actually about the concept of energy poverty. And I wouldn't say that I grew up with energy poverty, because I would consider the 1 billion people in the world who still don't have access to electricity at all to be in that category. But I definitely didn't have the luxuries that that people in America take for granted. So we did have electricity, but we didn't have dishwashers or laundry machines or air conditioner or even like electric heaters. And, you know, all of these things, they sound very superficial and like not having them is a first world problem. But when you think about what it actually entails, so for instance, not having a laundry machine means that you're washing your clothes by hand. And that alone takes, you know, hours of a person's day. And it's usually women who do that work. And same with dishwashers, and same with, I mean, any other machines that make our lives so much easier. And then in terms of you know, heaters and air conditioner, you know, I'm someone who has low blood pressure, for instance. So I remember on summertime, it was extremely hot and I couldn't even function as a human being because, you know, when you're extremely hot and you have low blood pressure, you just feel dizzy. So I couldn't be outside, couldn't play with my friends, couldn't sleep at night, which probably affects development. And then on the winter time, it was freezing and, you know, I had to stay right next to the fireplace, inhaling particulate matter from wood burning. So I'm sure all of that has health effects, and it also impacts just quality of life in general. One thing that I've learned after moving to the US and more recently doing all my work on energy is just that a high energy life is a high quality of life. And that's part of the reason why I'm so passionate about expanding the access to clean energy, because I think that everybody has the right to a high energy life.
Yeah, I heard you. I heard you actually say in an interview that, I'm paraphrasing here, but the gist of it was that you don't care as much about nuclear energy as you do the quality of life, and nuclear energy is the path that you see towards a better quality of life more than any other energy. And so I assume a lot of that comes from growing up where you did in Brazil, because it's funny, now that I get older, I'm kind of coming from the opposite perspective, where I grew up in Long Island, New York. I always had heating, air conditioning. It's kind of the typical New York suburb. And the older I get and the more I learn about the world, especially since I've started doing podcasting, which lets you talk to anyone with a Wi-Fi connection, I'm realizing how non-ordinary my upbringing is compared to the majority of the planet.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, you know, there's 1 billion people that don't have access to electricity now. And there's about 3 billion that use less electricity than an American fridge, which is, I mean, it's a completely different life, right? Compared to an average American person. And at the end of the day, I mean, we talk so much about equality, and I can't think of something that, you know, has so much effect as having access to reliable energy. And back to your point, I mean, I don't particularly care about nuclear as much. I care about clean energy, and I care kind of like about solving this paradox that we are in right now, which is, okay, we have on the one hand this 4 billion people who have very little or no access to electricity. And then we know that they want to get to the level of development that the United States has. And we cannot deny that. But we also know that to get to that level of development, if they use the traditional technologies like fossil fuels, it will have an impact on our planet that will be catastrophic. It already kind of is, but it will be even worse. So I think that people in developed nations should be working really hard to make sure that we have better technologies to offer developing ones, so they can go through that process in a less impactful way to our planet.
So one of the stories that you tell is your cousin sending you an email saying, "Will you buy me this book?" I think it would be helpful for people that are listening to you that may not be familiar with how you grew up and the views that you had at the time into how you view things today. I think it would be helpful to go through, why that book was so special to you and what that book was, first of all, what it kind of symbolized in your shift in thinking.
Sure. So I grew up in a very small town in Brazil. Brazil is a very Catholic country. I would say that 80% of the population is Catholic. Everybody that I knew was Catholic. My whole family, we went to church. I was baptized, went to Catholic school. And in school, I learned that, the world was created in 6 days and the whole story in the Bible. I think there was, the more I think about it, I'm like, I'm sure they mentioned evolution, but it was never as like, oh, this actually happened. It was just, oh, and there is this theory of evolution, but it's not really a thing. So I grew up with that mindset. I actually got into a different religion. I don't think I've ever spoken about this, but I actually got into a different religion that's very popular in Brazil. It's called spiritualism.
Spiritualism.
I think that's the name. And it was created by a French man called Allan Kardec. I think it's his name. Mm-hmm. And it's basically Catholicism with reincarnation. So I used to believe that, my spirit had reincarnated several lives. And I don't know, I got really into that religion at one point. Anyway, so grew up there, moved out after I finished high school to start modeling. And, I just was religious. I believed everything that I had learned in school because, of course, I didn't think that everybody around me was lying. And then fast forward, living in the United States, my cousin sent an email one day. It was 2009. He sent me an email asking if I could bring him a book whenever I went back to Brazil at the end of the year. And I said, sure, of course. And he sent the book to my house and I just left it there in a box. And then one day I was like kind of bored and I'm like, okay, I'm going to read this book. And I remember sitting down and reading it and getting goosebumps and thinking, oh my God, how did I not know any of this? And the book was The Greatest Show on Earth by Richard Dawkins. It's a whole book about evolution. And yeah, that set me on a path of knowledge. I went on Amazon right after it and searched for all the related books and started buying a ton of different books on popular science. So that book was the kind of the beginning of you taking a deeper dive into science and then eventually nuclear energy. Yeah, of course. So that book was, kind of it really opened my brain to this whole universe that I didn't know existed. And then I started learning about, other areas. I've always been fascinated by psychology. So I got really into evolutionary psychology for a little bit. Then I got into a little bit of, astronomy, just reading science, I guess, just learning how to learn. I would classify that period in my life. And because I was modeling at the time and not everybody in the fashion industry is interested in having these conversations, I created a Twitter account just so I could follow the scientists and start meeting like-minded people. And one of the people I started following was Carolyn Porco. She's a NASA scientist. She worked with Carl Sagan back in the day. And I think it was 2015 or 2016, she tweeted something about molten salt thorium reactors, which was just like this new type of nuclear reactors.
Molten salt thorium reactor?
Yeah.
And that's
I'm laughing now because
that's different than the nuclear reactors we have now.
Yeah, slightly different, but yeah, it's just like a variation, because you can use different types of fuels, and you can use different types of coolants, and yeah, so that was something that she tweeted about back in the day, and I got super curious, but of course, I Googled it and it was just impossible basically to understand. Especially at the time, there wasn't a lot of accessible information. So I just got that curiosity back then, but didn't really dedicate the time to learn about nuclear energy in general. So fast forward to 2019, which was, in my view, a horrible year. And now I'm like, 2019 was actually great. Take me back.
Yeah. Well, what was bad for you about 2019?
I just remember there were a lot of what seemed to be a lot of natural disasters that people traced back to climate change. So the ones that I paid the most attention to were the fires in Australia and the Amazon. Of course, being from Brazil, that felt very personal to me. And I remember seeing this video of a native Brazilian woman crying. I'm also partly native Brazilian, so I don't know, there's like even more of a personal connection. And her whole village was destroyed by these fires. And just knowing what what native Brazilians have gone through, and now, losing their homes because of climate change just broke my heart. And I felt compelled to use my platform to do something about it. So I started reading, what would take to quote unquote solve climate change. And of course, nuclear always comes up. And then, I remember that tweet back in the day by Carolyn Porco, and just started doing some research on nuclear energy. And I don't know, I would like to hear your experience, but my experience was once you start looking at the data, you just feel like you've been fooled your whole life.
Yeah. So my experience actually, so I had a kind of a gradual realization that could go back to another work by Richard Dawkins if I really trace it back, The God Delusion. And I grew up going to Catholic high school, was raised Catholic, and I wasn't so deep into it where I thought the world was, made in 6 days and like all that stuff. And I know a lot of people do believe that, and you believe what you're told when you're a kid. I was never told that. It was more the guilt side of it, and the Ten Commandments, and kind of like the more mainstream Catholicism of today. It wasn't super fundamental. And I started gravitating towards atheism in late high school, early college. I was seeing a lot of things come out with the Catholic Church, with, all those cases with horrible things happening to little kids. And I just started questioning the whole basis of Catholicism, which is you can't really ask questions. I remember asking questions in school, and the things we were told was that God is a mystery and he works in mysterious ways, and you're not meant to understand it. It's because he's so powerful, and you kind of just take
it's
that.
It's literally the opposite of science.
Yeah. You kind of just take that and roll with it until eventually you start banging your head against the wall. And I was probably, 18, 19, and stopped going to church after high school. And then a few years passed, and then I read The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, which he says in the book, I hope to make you an atheist by the time you're done with this. That this is basically his atheist argument. And it wasn't right away that I became a de facto atheist, which is how Richard Dawkins puts it. On his scale, I would say I'm a de facto atheist, where I live my life as though God doesn't exist. Although I acknowledge there's a chance that, anything's possible. So yeah, I had a shift where I became an atheist, and I felt more spiritual, which I know everyone says like, I'm spiritual. I'm not religious, but for me that meant I went inwards for a lot of things. I started meditating, started really analyzing what was going on, how I became much more interested in how I could live peacefully and treat other people kindly more than any like what's the meaning behind all this. That kind of became secondary to me, and atheism became useful because I would have interactions with people, and kind of in the back of my mind, if you're an atheist, you know that there's no second chance at treating people better, you know, the next time you see them in the afterlife or wherever. And so I still have moments where, you know, I treat people like shit. I'm like, oh, I wish I could have had that interaction back. But as an atheist, I feel like I'm much more in the moment, and there's no like, oh, I'm gonna have this conversation again, or I'm gonna see this person again, or, you know, I'm living my life in a way that is for the chance after everything happens. So that was kind of like my shift from Richard Dawkins, from a different Richard Dawkins book, The God Delusion. For nuclear energy, I really started going through it once I saw your material in more depth about probably a few weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I went through a bunch of TED Talks that were based in my recommendations from material that you had listed on your site, because I went through some of the videos you had on your homepage, and then I also YouTube started recommending me, like my entire recommended list turned into to nuclear energy. And so that's kind of where I'm at now, where I'm still on the surface level of it and trying to gain an understanding.
Just to go back to the point of atheism, I actually have a beef with atheism.
Sure.
I think we need something better. The way I see it, religion has many different facets. One of them is as a way to explain the universe, which is it's really bad at, precisely because the only way we can understand the universe is through science, is through asking questions and asking better questions and, you know, analyzing them. Mm-hmm. And religion is completely the opposite of that, is the cessation of thought and questioning. So I think that, you know, secularism tackles that facet of religion very well, but it doesn't tackle any of the other ones, which is, in my opinion, one of them is the community building aspect. And I would say that religion is one of the best human inventions. It has probably been the most successful at achieving that level of community building and large scale cooperation. And I think you also have religion as an awe creating experience. I have had several times stepping into Baroque churches in Italy. I just have tears coming down my face because it's so beautiful. And if it's beautiful nowadays, imagine when they were built. I mean, imagine the experience of someone living back then and just stepping into these amazing places where you're, I don't know, worshiping something that's bigger than you. So secularism misses those two other very, very big and important aspects. And it's something that humans crave. And I think that's why with the decline of religion and the rise of secularism, you see all these other crazy cultish things rising as well, like QAnon. Yeah. Right. Because people are still looking for those answers. So I think we need an atheism 3.0 that kind of tries to solve for those human needs. Yeah,
that's a good point, is that a lot of people gravitate towards religion because of the community aspect. And yeah, I had other communities that I was a part of because I played baseball in high school and college. You know, I lived in an area that was super close to the city. I know for a lot of people, their period during the week where they go see people and they go see their family and their friends, a lot of times in a lot of places that's at church. Like you go to church or temple or mosque, and that's your time of the week. That's like a social / religious experience. And I think religion has a lot of positive things, and people should follow the things that give them meaning and allow them to live in a fulfilling way. For me, and I wouldn't say it's for everyone, but for me though, atheism has also given me that useful component of not the useful component of kind of living like this is my only life because I believe that it is. And you're right, there's another element that atheism is missing in terms of the community aspect and also the higher power, because I do believe that there are non-human forces at work that we don't understand yet. And that sounds kind of crazy and woo-woo, but like when I'm at a music festival or and I'm standing around thousands of people and music is playing, you could feel that there's something going on. And it's not, I don't think it's God, it's not anything religious, but it's like a connectedness of humanity that's a force of people coming together that's greater than any one person. And I think that science will be able to explain a lot of those things that happen in the future. I think right now, the tools that we have, just like a lot of things like music and like the community aspect, and there's a lot of things that we don't understand yet that I expect science to be able to handle in the future, that are these kind of higher power things above the individual.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for sure, you will be able to explain. And some of it is like, I think it's limbic resonance, when you're singing in sync with other people or when you're dancing with other people. We have obviously evolved to respond to that. That's why music festivals are so popular, and music in general. Have you ever seen this study? I think it was done by Harvard, where they showed a bunch of people several different songs or like just music, and they were from all around the world, from like different tribes, remote tribes, and people were able to identify if the tunes were lullabies or war songs or just like celebration songs. And these were all in different languages that we don't understand, but people were totally able to identify the meaning behind the music, which is just fascinating.
Yeah, that makes sense. I haven't seen the study, but I've heard other songs, like some of the chants that rugby teams do that don't speak English, like some of the Samoan chants and other teams from around the world where they get together and they like lock arms, and I can tell that this is not a lullaby. Like they're about they're about to go to war. They're trying to hype themselves up, and you know, even going back to movies, you know, I could picture movies where someone's singing in a foreign language and you know that it's meant to be this sort of softer thing. So I haven't seen the study, but that's interesting. I'll have to take a look at it.
Yeah, it's super cool.
So how did people in your industry, which is the modeling industry, how did they react when you first started posting content that was nuclear influential? Because I imagine, you know, it's an uncommon thing for a model to take on an influence in nuclear energy, and to the extent that you've done it, because every model, I imagine, you know, I've never done it, but like you post the picture of like your clean water bottle, or you're using like an eco-conscious bag, and like that's it. And I'm sure some models take it super seriously. Others, it's more like, oh, I'm just going to post this picture. But you've gone really deep into nuclear energy. So how did people first react when you started posting those type of things?
So my agents were all horrified when I told them. I said, hey, listen, I have an idea for my platform. This is how I want to use it. They're like, wait, nuclear energy? And then I started, you know, showing them the data, and kind of the influencing work began even before I started posting. It was with convincing my managers that this was a good thing. So they were definitely horrified. And I think now they're starting to be okay with it, because they see that it's having an impact, I think, or we think at least. My followers were definitely confused. My clients, randomly enough, don't care that much about my content. I'm like, hey, have you seen the stuff I've been posting? And they're like, yeah, but they don't actually they don't actually get it that much. But I would say it was definitely more negative than positive. I think people are starting to understand what I'm doing now, that they've seen a few pieces written, and they're seeing more of the content.
So your managers were hesitant. You said they were horrified when you started posting.
They were horrified. Yes.
So what kept you posting it? Because I don't have a manager, but I imagine if I did and he or she was horrified, that it would make me think twice about posting that type of stuff, because especially when you're at the beginning, you don't really have a huge sample size of posts and how people are responding to it. So what kept you going beyond the first few posts about nuclear energy?
Well, I think it really matters at the end of the day. I felt like I was uniquely positioned to take on that role, considering the audience I have, which is people who would never think about nuclear energy, right? And then kind of the skills I've developed of being able to create videos and be able to create that type of influencer content and play around with the idea of an influencer who's talking about makeup, but actually she's talking about nuclear energy. So I just felt by myself in this odd Venn diagram, and to me, it really mattered. And that's why I kept doing it, even though people were confused and not really liking my content or understanding where it was going.
So why nuclear energy? Because there are other energies you could have chosen. For someone who's an energy amateur like myself, could you explain what makes nuclear energy so fascinating to you above things like wind, solar, water? Not that you shouldn't pursue any other energies, but like why nuclear energy for you? Why have you chosen to focus on that type of energy?
Well, I don't want to go super deep into climate change and what it would take to solve it, but bottom line, it's because we need it to solve climate change. At minimum, we just have to keep all of our existing nuclear plants working, but we actually need to expand and build more. I'm just going to take it, we're just going to take it that climate change is a real thing and that it's caused by human activity. And there is scientific consensus on how to solve it. So we're just going to assume that climate change is real and that it's caused by human activity. And there is scientific consensus on how to solve it. We have to eliminate our emissions of greenhouse gases. And the way to do that is, first, of course, we have to identify where these emissions are coming from. And there are 5 different sectors that create emissions. There's the transportation sector, which is things like cars, motorcycles, ships, planes, etc. Then there is the electricity sector, which is creating electricity to, power our homes, light up our lights, and power our microwaves and laundry machines. And then there's industry, which is manufacturing stuff, and that's mostly really high temperature things. So you usually have to burn things like coal and oil or gas. And then you have buildings, which is mostly heaters and stoves, which is, again, mostly natural gas. And then you have agriculture. That's like cow burps, which releases methane. And the crazy thing, I didn't even know this until recently, but apparently one cow releases on average the same amount of greenhouse gases as 4 European cars per year.
Wow.
So
cows release a lot of gas.
A lot of methane. Yeah. So, if we look at these 5 sectors and we say, okay, how do we cut the emissions here? The first thing we have to do is just to electrify most things, meaning convert all cars to electric cars, motorcycles to electric versions. Planes are more complicated because you need a very giant battery in order to be able to get the energy necessary. And then industry is also a little bit complicated because it's a lot of heat, but electricity is fairly easy because electricity is a secondary form of energy. So you have to create it using a primary form, which could be coal, gas, oil, solar, wind, nuclear, or hydro.
Okay.
So the goal here is to electrify most things, electrify buildings, so you don't have stovetops that are gas. They are electric stovetops, and then you have heaters that are electric as well. And then the second phase is to decarbonize, meaning just make sure all of that electricity comes from clean energy sources like wind, solar, hydro, or nuclear, also geothermal. So here's the thing. There are countries in the world that have already decarbonized their electricity, meaning they get their electricity from clean sources. So one example is Iceland. We also have Sweden, Finland, and Ontario in Canada is also a place where they decarbonize their electricity. And when you look at these places, they rely mostly on either hydro or nuclear. Mm-hmm. And hydro, as you might know, is geographically limited, as is the case with most renewables. Nuclear is the only one where you can build pretty much anywhere. I mean, there's some people who say you shouldn't build on, in Japan, for instance, because there is a lot of earthquakes and more prone to accidents. But you can build pretty much anywhere, even in the desert. And as you know, nuclear has this really bad stigma, really bad reputation that was caused by a few accidents and just pop culture. So just looking at all this data and understanding that nuclear has to be a part of the solution, and also knowing that it has this terrible reputation, and seeing that wind and solar are kind of winning in the public arena. People love wind and solar, right? Mm-hmm. And batteries. There's a lot of advocates and proponents of this technologies, but nuclear doesn't. And I just saw this opportunity to use pop culture in a way to change public perception, so there is wider acceptance of the technology.
Yeah, it seems like, from my super general surface level understanding of nuclear energy, it seems like at a basic level, nuclear has the most potential to bring the most amount of people out of energy poverty by the way that you produce energy, which is by splitting atoms, and you create massive amounts of energy. And there are a lot of things when I was going through, like I didn't even believe some of the things that I was hearing in TED Talks, because like you said, the perception is so different from the facts. And for you, are there any, when you were first starting to get into nuclear energy, are there any facts that you came across, or any things in particular that you heard that were so crazy where you thought this can't be true, and then you looked into it and it was actually true? Something like if you told someone today, they'd be like you're lying, like that's not real.
Yeah, I think that one was obviously the number of deaths caused by accidents. I assumed they were in the millions. When you hear about Chernobyl and you hear about Fukushima, most people assume that they're in the hundreds of thousands or millions of deaths. And when you hear that the confirmed deaths are much, much lower than that, and, I'm careful about using numbers here, because radiation is something very complex that we're just starting to understand. But it's definitely underneath 100 deaths caused by radiation exposure from these accidents. And, of course, there's other things to account for instance, cancers that will show up later in life. And it's just very complicated to try to attribute a number, but it's definitely less than hundreds of thousands of deaths. And then the other thing is just the power of the atom, the energy density. In one of my videos, I talk about how and uranium pellet, which is the fuel used in nuclear power plants, which is roughly the size of a gummy bear. Yeah. It has as much energy as 149 gallons of oil, or 2,000 pounds of coal.
So one uranium pellet, which is the size of a gummy bear, has as much energy as 149 gallons of oil.
And
2,000 pounds of coal.
Right. These numbers are, I don't even think we can understand them because it's mind blowing. So these are some of the things that definitely surprise me a lot. And I think there is a lot of people get into nuclear and they end up going a little bit crazy. They become nuclear bros because they feel much like, when you get out of religion and you learn that it was, kind of the Bible was a lie, and you go like militant atheist and you're like, it's stupid. Yeah. I feel like people that get into nuclear go through a very similar phase just because they feel like they've been duped and now they're more prone to believing other conspiracies. Yeah,
it's kind of like, I know some people that both people that I have interactions with at maybe like an acquaintance level, and also public figures that do similar things politically, where you kind of you break away from one political party with good intentions at first, where you say, okay, like maybe what's going on here is not what I am about, and then you're kind of figuring things out, but then another party grabs you and you go like super deep into that other party.
Right.
And it's like you've moved from one echo chamber to the other, instead of questioning what is going on both sides of it. Like you break out of it and then you start to question things, but then you fall back into something else. So it seems like, from what you're saying, and you've also spoken about a lot of the kind of the behind the scenes not animosity, I don't know if that's the right word, but like the tension between groups of energies, like people that back different sorts of energies, like wind versus solar, or solar versus nuclear, or whatever. Like the main goal, like you said, is to increase the quality of life, and it seems like a lot of that siloed off thinking is actually making things take longer for people to have access to clean energy.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of silly to be fighting over, it's like bike shedding, right? When 84% of the energy in the world is still supplied by fossil fuels. And here we are fighting about, renewables are the best. Nuclear. The truth is we're going to need all of it, especially if we want developing nations to get wealthier so they can increase the quality of life of their citizens. The estimation is that the global energy consumption will double by 2050. So we have to replace all the existing fossil fuels and more. It's crazy. We need all of it. And I also think it's crazy people who think it should be 100% nuclear, because if you have great solar potential or you have great hydro potential, like my country, Brazil, is like 80% hydro. We have great hydro potential. Why wouldn't you use that? I think it's about choosing the best resources for each region. And in my opinion, nuclear should not be counted off just because of public misinformation. It seems like a very unwise thing to do.
Yeah, and I definitely think there's a huge gap between the public perception and what the facts show. And like you said, it's hard to tell the numbers with radiation and things like that, because we're still learning more about radiation. But even if you look at that and you take what the radiation numbers are estimated to be compared to what what you thought they were before, based off of watching Chernobyl on HBO or The Simpsons or whatever. Like when I watched the TED Talk, Why I Changed My Mind About Nuclear Power by Michael Schellenberger, and he was talking about the number of deaths from Fukushima due to radiation and Chernobyl. And some of them are, in the dozens or hundreds, which is still terrible. Like you don't want anyone to die, of course, but I would have guessed at least hundreds of thousands before that. Like I would thought, like, people all over the world were being birth defected and people were dying, by the 100,000s. And it's
and listen, there is definitely some of that. And the reason why I'm very careful to talk about these numbers is because human suffering is human suffering. And I feel empathetic to people who have gone through just the psychological trauma of enduring something like that in your town and having your whole community devastated by an accident, right? I don't think we should minimize that. So, but it's definitely not in the hundreds of thousands. And the other thing is there is something special in the public perception about radiation, because just in 2019, there was a major accident in a hydropower dam in Brazil that killed 250 people, which is more than radiation has killed so far. And it spilled this metal tailings into rivers and communities. And we don't know the long-term impact that will have. I'm sure there will be some toxicity that will affect human health. Yet we don't seem to bring that up. So I'm kind of also fascinated about what is it about radiation that makes it so scary for people. I don't know if it's the fact that we can't see it, if it's...
Yeah, I mean, maybe it has to do with COVID, like what we're seeing kind of now with the pandemic. It's an enemy that you can't see and you can't feel it. And it's almost like a disease in the way where it seeps into your body and it changes you chemically, and it has these bad effects like that can be long term with COVID and radiation. Not that they're the same thing at all, but like in terms of the public perception, I feel like that the not seeing the enemy almost makes it worse, because it could be anywhere or it could be nowhere. And we've seen all different types of reactions to COVID depending on the country's regulations across the globe. And with I don't know either why radiation. I suspect it has a lot to do with human psychology. Maybe somehow we evolved to see and fear things that are right in front of us. And that gets an adrenaline rush, an adrenaline spike. So like if radiation would like kill us on the spot and you could actually see it, then, that would be a warranted fear. But maybe it has to do with the way we're wired psychologically, that we're just not really good at perceiving threats that happen over a long period of time, decades in many cases, for people to feel the effects. And we also can't see it. Like we're super visual creatures.
Right. And we also don't know the threshold, because we know that very high doses of radiation in a short period of time are lethal and are directly related to an increase in cancers. But when you get to the lower doses, it gets very complicated. And the science seems to show that at low doses and over, a wider period of time, it doesn't have negative impacts, or doesn't have as much as we used to think. But it's also something that's really hard to study scientifically, because you can't expose people to radiation and, start following them to see what the health effects will be.
Yeah. No one's going to sign up for a scientific study where it's like, we're just going to expose you to radiation, but we'll give you $100.
Yeah, but we do know, for instance, that the people who get exposed to most radiation are... actually, astronauts get exposed to a lot of radiation, because radiation is naturally occurring. Like we're being radiated right now. Everywhere on planet Earth is radioactive. Some places more, some places less. For instance, the higher up you go, the more radiation you get, because some of it comes from space. And astronauts, in this case, they just get a lot more radiation. And then you have flight attendants and pilots as well get a lot of radiation, because they, again, are higher. And we don't see necessarily a direct increase in cancer cases, in especially in pilots and flight attendants, because we have a lot of data from that. And even people who work in nuclear power plants receive a lot less radiation than people who work in airplanes. So it's all that to say, it's really complicated. But what we do know is that at low levels and over a longer period of time, it's possibly safe. And And there is a podcast that I would highly recommend to anyone who is more interested in this, because I'm of course not an expert. And we can link in the podcast notes.
Yeah, of course. What's the podcast?
So it's the Decouple podcast, which is one of my favorite podcasts about nuclear energy. And he interviewed Dr. Jerry Thomas. She actually has worked with Chernobyl survivors.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, since the accident. And she's the head of the Chernobyl Tissue Bank. So she's been following survivors, and she, interestingly enough, she was anti-nuclear. And after working with the survivors, she became pro because she realized that the effects were much lower than expected.
Yeah, that's something I realized when I was going through these videos online and your content, and then kind of going down the rabbit hole, is that there are a lot of really smart people that they seem like they're smart. I've never actually met them, and they're explaining nuclear energy to a dumber person like me, so they must be smart to allow me to understand it. And also your videos are super helpful as well, which I want to get into. But a common thread that I've realized is that there are a lot of smart people that are making these types of videos along the lines of, I used to be anti-nuclear and then I changed my mind once I started looking at the facts, or I used to be kind of on the edge of the nuclear community, and now I'm an activist, or now I'm I'm dedicating my life to studying it. And I think that's always worth looking into when you have people that are super smart, that are at the upper echelons of science, that are switching their views on things because they're, of course, evidence-based, if you're going to be that deep into science, and then not only just like kind of pivoting, but then going in the complete opposite direction, where some people have, kind of like Michael Schellenberger, where he's like, I completely changed my mind on nuclear power, when he was actually, I believe, anti-nuclear back in the day.
Yeah, a lot of people were traditionally anti-nuclear because that's the default, kind of, right? I feel like if you're just not going to ever think about the issue, you're by default slightly anti, just because of culture. But yeah, that's the beauty, to me, that's the beauty of science, is that you have to change your mind when better facts come in. And by the way, if, I don't know, in 10 years or if tomorrow more data comes in and it actually says that nuclear is not great and that we don't need it to solve climate change and that it has all these other issues, then I'm happy to change my mind again. That
would piss off the nuclear bros, though. They're going to be pissed at you for changing your mind.
They're already pissed off at me. They're like, what? You don't want it to be 100% nuclear?
So do you get backlash from both ends, people that are anti-nuclear and then also people that are saying you're not nuclear enough?
I think the people who are pro, like nuclear bros, they don't tell me much, but I know from just people telling me that they're pretty upset about some things I'm saying. But listen, to me, I'm saying it like I see it, as I see the data. I cannot see a world where we're powering our civilization with 100% nuclear in the near future. Maybe in 100 years from now, if we ever figure fusion, which is big question mark. There are some people who say we can never figure that out. But if we ever do, then it might make sense. But as of now, with the current technology and the current political and psychological perspective on it, it's just impossible to imagine that world.
So I really want to get into Isodope, your platform, and some of the videos that you created. So first, what was the kind of the spark of Isodope to not only post about nuclear energy, but funnel it into this platform? And you also have somewhat of an alter ego where you dress up for videos and it's like this otherworldly character. Your eyes are fluorescent and it's like this, again, it's kind of like an alter ego you created. What was the spark behind Isodope? Yeah,
so I was very inspired by Little Michaela. I don't know if you're familiar with that. She's like a digital influencer.
Yeah, I've heard of her.
Yeah, slash singer. And I just really like the idea of being a digital character that doesn't really exist. But of course, it's just me editing my videos, so I cannot make myself digital. So I just have to get as close as I can with contacts and makeup and editing. So I was definitely intrigued by that. I also think that in order to get the people whose attention I want to capture, it couldn't just be me, speaking in front of a whiteboard talking about nuclear energy. It had to be something that was aesthetically interesting enough and also weird enough to capture people's attentions. We live in a world where people are literally inundated with media all day long. You kind of like have to hide and hide your phone from yourself if you don't want to see anything. So I knew that I had to create something that was very odd and aesthetically different. And I've always been, of course, very into science, very into space. So my whole aesthetic has always been around being a little bit of an alien and a little bit of like a video game character. So that's how the idea of, creating a character came about. And yeah, and I think that's honestly might be the only reason why it works. It's because it is so bizarre and so weird.
Yeah, well, it's definitely working. And I've actually been thinking a lot about that for my own content, creating characters, and because sometimes I just don't feel like speaking as myself. I feel like sometimes the content comes across better. For podcasts, I'm always going to be myself because it's more long form. I can't play a character for 2-3 hours at a time. I could try to, but eventually you kind of just fall into yourself. But for 30-60 second videos, I feel like sometimes playing a character gives me permission to say something that I wouldn't say, even if I'm not explicitly creating a character where I'm saying this is someone else, kind of getting into the mindset of someone else and almost going in and out of that for video content, especially because I'm definitely not supernatural in front of the camera. Creating that character kind of allowed me a space to be whoever I wanted to be or say whatever I wanted to say. And if people don't like it, in my mind, I'm just like, well, that's just like some character I'm playing. Or if someone's like, oh, that video, like that was such a cringy video or whatever, I didn't like that video, or that was a great video, I'm like, well, that's just like some character I play on TikTok or something. So I definitely respect the characterization of Isodope.
Yeah, I think it has possibly something to do with that. And it's also because nuclear energy is like a sliver of Isabelle, right? It's something that, of course, I care a lot about and I think has to be talked, but it's not what I want my whole personhood to be. There's so much more that I'm curious about and that I would like to explore, even publicly, start talking about other topics. So it doesn't make sense for Isabelle to be all about nuclear. It's just a part of me, and that part of me is Isodope.
Yeah, it seems like as soon as you pivot to something else, people want to put you in a box where if you're a model and then you start talking about nuclear energy, people are like, what are you? I don't get it. I need to fit you into what I think you are and what I expect you to be. And then when you evolve to something else, people are even more confused. And I actually like that in people. I just listened to a podcast of this guy he's a UFC commentator, or a UFC referee, excuse me. So he referees mixed martial arts fights. He flies planes. He's a pilot for Southwest. He was in the Navy, and he has a bunch of master's degrees, and he like does all these different things, and he's constantly reinventing himself. And I really respect the people that are able to do that, like yourself, that are willing to take these uncommon views based on your initial career, which is a model, and then kind of build upon that and not default to the expectations of the box that other people want to put you in.
Yeah, I actually love that when people tell me that they can't put me in a box. I feel very proud of myself. Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of the time that we live in right now, is that we have so many ways of existing in the world and showing up in the world. And with the access to internet, people can learn pretty much anything, which again has had some catastrophic results recently, because they can learn pretty much anything good or bad. Yeah,
and you can learn anything good or bad, and you can also teach anything good or bad without the credentials to teach it. You could call yourself a doctor and get on YouTube, and millions of people follow you, and people find out you haven't actually studied medicine or anything. You're just like some random guy.
Which is something that I'm very concerned about, because I don't have any, right? Like I'm literally a model. I only have a high school diploma. I started going to college and I was like, I feel like this is a waste of money and time. And I just dropped out. So I definitely don't have any credentials to be talking about nuclear energy. So that's something I feel very responsible about. That's why I try to do a lot of research, and I have a lot of people who check all of my content before it goes out into the world. And
so you have other people in the community look at it before it goes out?
100%. Now, for example, I'm working on a nuclear waste series that I've been working on forever. And I reached out to someone in the renewables community to check all of my numbers, because I'm going to be talking about renewables waste as well. And I had people in the nuclear community do the calculations for me, but of course they are biased. And so I just wanted to give the same chance that I'm giving people in the nuclear community to people in the renewables community. So it's basically 3 people. And we keep every weekend we work on different numbers. But yes, I definitely check all of my information several times before putting it out into the world.
Yeah. It seems like it would be a strength to have separation from the scientific community, to not have the quote unquote credentials, because you're doing a job that I think is needed, where you're transforming the fact-based evidence that scientists are discovering and constantly reevaluating and innovating. And scientists, at least the stereotype is that they're not super high in terms of the communication skills. Like, you could get away with being a scientist without having super effective communication skills. I say that as someone who's never worked in science. And you have this data that you want people to be able to absorb, and you need it to be put in a sort of a type of content that is interesting to people, and you're not just throwing facts at them, because you're never going to get anyone to change by just throwing facts in their face. You have to make people desire the change. And that's why I think you have a super hard job, and why it's good that maybe you're not credentialed in that community, because your separation, it seems like it allows you to take the facts and transform it into interesting content that is relatable to the average person like myself, who sees it, where I'm like, oh, this is cool. This woman is dressed in this cool suit. Her eyes are lighting up. She's talking about something that has to do with makeup, but also there's this, like, she gets into nuclear, and like you weave the nuclear information, the nuclear energy facts in and out of your content. And the way that you do it is like some of the most popular YouTube videos or TikTok videos. And so that's a skill on its own, is being able to communicate effectively. And that's something I'm trying to work on now for myself as a podcaster, is how do I condense that down to a 140 character tweet or a 30-second video on TikTok, and make that interesting to people. And you've obviously have found a way to do that, to take the facts that someone like me normally wouldn't care about, and then you put them in a video, and you're like, oh wait, there's something here. also this video is interesting. This person, you know, she looks like someone I would see out in New York City. She's not like a scientist in a lab somewhere that, you know, maybe wouldn't be the first person I would talk to if I go out. So I think that is why it may be a strength, that your separation from that community kind of gives you the freedom to be creative with the data.
Right. And I don't think nuclear energy advocates were even allowed to create such crazy content. You know, I say the nuclear industry as if it was this one thing that everybody knows each other, but it's not. It's, you know, it's very separated, but they're very traditional. A lot of people are still very conservative in that community. And so I think if someone proposed to, I don't know, the science department, the nuclear engineering department at MIT, or, you know, a nuclear energy company to create something like what I'm doing, it would be turned down immediately.
Yeah.
And a lot of people in the beginning, when I started releasing my videos, a lot of people in the community were shocked and they reacted negatively. I still get people who are like, who are you? Why do you feel like you can talk about nuclear energy? Even though I'm saying positive things and my facts are right, they still criticize it because it's weird. But yeah, I think definitely what I found works in terms of condensing this dense information is just to contextualize the data, because people don't care about the energy density of uranium per se, but they care about the fact that you can create a lot more energy in a smaller space, which, you know, requires less land, which then is better for the environment. Mm-hmm. So I think the key is always giving some context and always showing things that can be visually understood, at least in my case.
Could you walk me?
Yeah, it's definitely a different skill.
Yeah. Could you walk me through one of your specific videos? The one that comes to my mind is the video with the makeup. And I think it could be useful for other people to hear, and also for myself. What's your thought process behind making those videos, aside from the fact that it's nuclear, it's about nuclear energy, but like how do you think about the structure of the video? Because I think that could be beneficial for anyone that's trying to create content that grabs people's attention. Like, how do you think about the lead in? Like, when do you hit people with facts? How do you think about the layout and the background and things like that?
Yeah, so when I had the idea of becoming a nuclear energy influencer, I use the word influencer for a reason. It's because I want to create influencer type of content, or what people see as influencer type of content, but to talk about nuclear energy. So of course, when you go and you look at influencer content, the most popular ones are makeup tutorials, or what I eat in a day, or exercise videos. And so from the beginning, I had this idea of using these themes to actually talk about nuclear energy. Of course, this was just an idea, and it's really hard to make that connection in your mind immediately. So my creative process is, I have the idea. I usually think about a word. In the case of the makeup tutorial, it was a little bit harder because, you know, the transition wasn't as smooth. But in the case of the uranium pellet video, which starts as a what I eat in a day video, I had in a previous video talked about how a nuclear reactor works, and I had used the uranium pellets being roughly the size of a gummy bear. So that in the what I eat in a day video, I saw a clear connection between gummy bears and uranium pellets. So I said, okay, I have to somehow talk about how I eat gummy bears in the day, and then I can make that transition to uranium pellets. And then I know a lot of people who are very into bodybuilding, and I know that community loves to eat gummy bears after working out.
Really?
Some of them will, oh yeah, it's a thing.
Is it the sugar?
It's like they'll eat...
Yeah, so
apparently there's something about the type of sugar that replenishes your glucose levels after working out, and then they'll also sometimes drink raw egg whites, which is gross. But
I've done it a couple times before. I don't know how good it works, but it definitely feels funny on the way down.
Yeah. See, I wouldn't use that for any of my videos. But I saw that clear connection of like, oh, okay, so I can talk about how I wake up and I drink coffee, because that's actually true. I used to do intermittent fasting at the time. So I wake up, I drink coffee, work out, and then I'll say I eat gummy bears, which are roughly the size of uranium pellets. And then I merged into talking about nuclear energy. So it's all about finding these words that have certain connections and then using them as a merger. But I have to start the video with types of content that people gravitate towards. And those are, again, makeup tutorials, what I eat in a day, exercise videos. Those are all things that people like to consume, but also expect of me as a female fashion model who has, a social media presence. So what has worked, the formula that has worked for me is just using that as a vehicle to grab people's attentions and then driving that attention towards something that I think is very important and very meaningful.
So you try to take one idea that could be an idea or a word that could be from the fashion world or model world, something like the gummy bears that has to do with working out. And also, it's a very influencer type food. I've seen influencers with very colorful food. And then you try to tie that. And so you have the beginning in mind, which could be like the gummy bear from the modeling world. And then you have the end in mind, which is the uranium pellets. And then you try to figure out a way to bridge the gap between those two.
Yeah, so I usually have first I know which subjects I want to talk about. So I knew that I wanted to talk about when you shut down a nuclear power plant, it's replaced by fossil fuels. So I knew that. I also knew that I wanted to talk about the density of uranium. So I think about first the broader concept and the conversation I want to have. And then I try to think about words that are related to that concept and that would have something in common with this completely different world of, like you said, modeling or influencer type of content. And then I open a Google, if you want to go through like the boring creative process.
Yeah. I think it's super
Google
interesting.
Doc. You do. It's, I guess everybody's creative process is the same, but I open a Google Doc and I start typing and I start playing around with the script. I usually hate it. And then I scratch it and then I write a different one. And that process goes on, honestly, 10, sometimes 20 times. And then I finally get something that's mildly interesting, but still is not there. So then I record myself and then I edit and then I start playing around with the images behind it and with the graphs. And that's usually also terrible. And I also hate it. So my mood when I create these videos is like, oh, this is a really good idea when it's just in my mind. And then I type it down and I'm like, oh my God, this is horrible. And then
I do the same thing. I go through emotional highs and lows when I make videos, especially like TikTok. Like I hate myself and I love myself with the same video throughout the same creative process, because I'll start with the writing aspect too. I'll write out the video literally word for word. And then first it starts like in my head where I think it's the greatest idea in the world.
In our heads, everything
views.
Is like the greatest ideas.
Yeah, I'm like 100 million views, easy. Let me write this out. And then I write it out, and then figuring out is, that part I've always felt like I could write out an idea somewhat naturally, but then when I start to say it, sometimes I'm recording and I'm like, you are the fakest person in the world. Like, how is this coming out of your mouth right now? Like, it seems supernatural when you're writing it down, and then all of a sudden when it comes time to record, so like I do a lot of the rewriting as I'm actually saying it, because when it comes out of my mouth and I cringe, I'm like, oh my God, like I would never fucking say this. I need to figure out some other way to get this point across, because it just like doesn't feel right. So I imagine coming like and I'm also not trying to combine that with something as complicated as nuclear energy. So I imagine the creative process for you can go through these highs and lows too, from writing it out to saying it, to having the idea and trying to communicate that on a platform like YouTube or Twitter or TikTok.
Right. Yeah. I mean, definitely. And it's a lot of lows. And I usually hate most of my content most of the time.
Oh, me too.
And
even some of the things that people like, I'm like, oh, like why are people liking this? Like it's so bad.
Right. But at the same time, I think that the creative process is about just putting in work like everything else. It's just about tweaking and changing. And I spend hours editing these videos, and I edit them 1,000 times, and I, change the graphs and change the colors. And there's something about the rhythm of how fast paced and how much you move around and you change your angles that for me is very important in my videos, because I notice if I stay, in the same position looking into the camera for a second too long, it kind of becomes boring. But this is a little bit intuitive. I don't know that I've trained myself to be perceptive about this slight changes. So for me, a big part of my videos is the editing process. That's when I really get down to making it the most captivating that it can be. If it's in terms of, the GIFs that I use in the back, or the graphs, or just the position of my body, or even the tone of voice, that's where it gets really interesting, and that's where I spend most of my time.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed for videos especially that it helps keep people engaged longer when you're making more cuts. So
right.
even if I'm not moving, if I just zoom in or zoom out a little bit,
exactly,
I'll do it midway through a sentence, or kind of like during a natural pause, I'll make a cut. And then also changing the background. So filming, the first 10 seconds in front of this wall, and then maybe moving outside my bedroom, kind of even though I'm not changing, the background for some reason is keeping people engaged. And I think it probably has something to do with people's attention spans being shorter and shorter, which I definitely feel myself when I'm going through videos. Like if it's not bringing me in the first 3 seconds, I'm kind of like, all right, next.
Right. Well, yeah, our attention spans it's definitely an issue, and I feel conflicted a little bit, because on the one hand, I understand that, and that's why I do short videos, because I think that nobody has the patience to read a book about nuclear energy or watch a long YouTube presentation on it. So on the one hand, I feel like, okay, I have to take advantage of the fact that people have short attention spans and use that to communicate what I'm trying to say. But on the other hand, I kind of feel guilty for enabling that type of behavior, instead of, maybe saying, well, people should be paying more attention and doing more long format reading or watching longer videos.
Well, I think of it more like an entrance point, because for you, your ultimate goal would be for people to then go check out the longer form content on your website, and also other nuclear energy resources and the longer podcasts and interviews that you've done, which is kind of how I think about it with my own short form content, where I'm like, my ultimate foundation is podcasting. I whatever I do, I'm always going to want to have conversations with people. So everything else is like a tool to bring people into that, and then also have other people check out the guests. So it's like, if a TikTok video, maybe it's like this superficial topic, or it's just kind of like this joke thing, but then someone clicks into the link and listens to a podcast with someone like yourself, and then they go check out nuclear energy after the fact. That's kind of how I think of it. It's like a tool. I'm willing to look like an idiot because I know it's like a tool to draw people into the content, which I ultimately care about. Like I put in the majority of my time to making good podcasts, and TikTok, while I do care about that, if TikTok went away tomorrow, like I'd use something else. Like I'd go on Instagram or whatever, but I'm always going to do podcasting.
Right. That's definitely a good way to put it, because that's exactly my goal. I don't pretend to go that deep into the subject. It's more really about getting people curious enough to and I hate using this phrase, but do their own research and like you said, go deeper in the YouTube section or just on different websites. But yeah, it definitely takes a lot of work though. I think people underestimate how much time a TikTok video takes.
Yeah. It I definitely respect the videos that I see where I could tell someone put a lot of work into it, like the ones that you do. I'm basically just talking into the camera and I edit it on the app and that's it. I know a lot of the ones you do, you have these complicated backgrounds, you're putting on different outfits, you're adding effects. And so I see a video like that and I have a lot more respect for that editing process, more than I did before I started making video content, for sure. There's definitely a lot that goes into it that if you've never done it yourself, you kind of take it for granted, and then you actually make a TikTok video and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing right now, which is how I first felt.
Yeah, even the dance videos, you look at those dance videos and you're like, oh, this is like easy, and then you try to learn and it takes, I don't know, 2 hours for you to remember the dance and then get it right and get it. I mean, it's very time consuming.
Will you be incorporating any dances in the future into your nuclear energy influencing?
I did one video with dance.
Which one was that?
This was way in the beginning. I was just trying all different formats on TikTok and seeing what stuck. I think that now I have a big enough audience where I can stick to my style, which is the videos that I do. I did one. I thought it was okay. I guess I could make a different one to see how it goes, but it's not my favorite format. My favorite format is what I'm doing, which is just like talking to the camera and just explaining these concepts. I'm not gonna explore that route anymore.
Yeah, I've done a couple dance ones as well that have not worked out so well. So I was like, all right, people don't want to see that, so I'm just gonna talk, because in the end, that's what I'm doing anyway on a podcast. Yeah,
but and I don't know why I feel compelled to talk about this now, but it's something else that I'm interested in. Let's go for it.
Perfect form, perfect format.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's just about failure and about trying things. I'm sure a lot of people look at my stuff and they think, oh my God, how is she putting, herself out there in this way and making these videos that to some people I'm sure look silly. But I have in recent years totally reframed the concept of failure as to, I'm literally just trying to find my lane and trying to learn things for eventually what will be, my legacy and the thing that I leave behind. And the way I see creating content is very much like I'm just trying things. And I have hope that I will stick to something that makes sense for me and that resonates with people. But I'm not embarrassed at all about having tried this formats that didn't work.
As much as I joke about it, I don't take down the videos that I'm embarrassed about, or maybe the ones that haven't done well. I'm proud of a lot of the videos and things that I've made that have gotten almost no views, because I put it out and I thought it was really good, and that's ultimately at the end of the day, that's how I want to judge it. But you're right, there's so many ideas, especially at the beginning. You're kind of just throwing a bunch of shit against the wall and seeing what sticks, right. And that's the only way to find your lane, because everyone thinks they know what their lane is, but then you also have to figure out, how do you align what you want to talk about with what other people want to hear about or watch? Because if you want to create content that's interesting, you have to get other people to want to consume it. And so
exactly,
I've definitely learned from the way that I say things, or the way that I edit it, or just different topics that I talk about, where, okay, maybe I wasn't planning on talking about this, but for whatever reason, this video blew up and there's something there, and I can include things from that video that did really well and take elements from that and use it to create another video of something else that I really want to talk about. And so it's kind of like this learning process. And also leaning into silly things that get attention. I think if you're playing the long game and there's something that's getting you attention that may be silly in the short term, or you're like, I don't know why people are watching it, but they are, I think it could be a good move to lean into that and use it to divert people to the content you want them to ultimately take a look at. Because sometimes I'll do something and I'm like, oh, that's, it wasn't a super serious video, but for whatever reason people watched it, and so I kind of take that as a signal of, okay, for whatever reason people are interested in this, so I'm going to lean into it, and then I'm going to try to take elements from that and direct people's attention towards the podcasting or towards nuclear energy links or whatever it is that you want people to take a look at.
Yeah, absolutely. And also different platforms have different audiences, and you get different reactions on videos. Like my most successful video on TikTok is not at all my most successful video on Twitter, for instance. So yeah, it's all about trying things and exploring the world and reframing, I think, quote unquote, failure.
So what is your baseline of success with the content? Because metrics and indicators are really hard to, it's really hard to have a definitive metric when you're talking about influence, because you could see how many people watch a video or you could see how many people download a podcast, but it's really hard to know how much you're actually causing people to change their views. So for you, what do you view as success as an influencer? Like, what lets you know that you're doing a good job? Is it people sending you messages or emails or people commenting on videos? Like, what lets you know that you're really having an effect on changing people's views?
I think definitely people leaving comments and talking about their experience, if they've engaged with one of my contents and ended up doing research and learning or changing their minds. Also, how many times it's shared, even though it's like annoying because it's all about, numbers. But at the end of the day, if people share it, it's because they find it meaningful or interesting, or it just resonated with them. So those are definitely good metrics. Something that I'm very proud of recently is that I've been engaging with people traditionally in the environmental movement that are against nuclear, and they are more open to having this conversation because of my content. There's one account that's a pretty big climate change account on Instagram DM'd me saying they changed their mind on nuclear because of my makeup video talking about every time you shut down a nuclear power plant, it's replaced by fossil fuels, and that made them reconsider the technology. And they aren't there yet. They still have concerns around waste and around accidents, but they're at least open to having this conversation. And that to me is the most important thing. It's just the only way we can figure out what's best and what the way forward is as a society is if we talk to each other. And if we talk from a place of openness and understanding that we all have the same goal. We all want to solve this incredibly challenging problem of climate change, and we just disagree on how to get there. But the only way we can achieve that is through conversations.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of the connection with other people and having conversations, something that I wanted to ask you is, how has your view on love and connection with other people evolved since you've put yourself out there as an influencer and in a space that can have as much controversy as nuclear energy? Because there are a lot of differing opinions. There is a lot of people that are somewhat negative in the space, and it seems like you've managed to stay very positive and uplifting and kind of, focusing on improving people's lives. So how has your view on love evolved as an influencer and since you've started this journey?
That's a very interesting question. Baseline is I truly believe that most people are good. I think there's very, very few people in the world that are evil or, bad. And I think that most people, when they're rude or they write something mean to me, that to me is a reflection of their unhappiness, more than a reflection of my work or the ideas I'm putting forward into the world. I think that even before I started, doing this work as a nuclear energy influencer, I totally changed the way I show up in the world about, I would say like a year and a half ago. It was after going to Hoffman. Have you heard of Hoffman, the Hoffman process?
No, I haven't. What's Hoffman?
So Hoffman is basically this like boot camp therapy that they had a location in close to Napa in California. It was actually unfortunately burned down during the Napa fires this year. But it's basically a method to really explore yourself and the patterns you have in your life. And I mean, try for as much as you can to change that and get over trauma and get over, bad childhood experiences. So I'm not going to go into the details of how it works, but one thing that one of my patterns before going into this process was of being extremely critical. I used to criticize everything, people, ideas. And in my mind, I thought I had a very high bar and, people just didn't meet my expectations. And after going there, I understood that it actually came from a place of deep insecurity, about my intelligence, of deep insecurity about not having achieved the things that I wanted to achieve that in my mind were like a marker of success. And I think that after going through that, I understood, wow, this is, first of all, criticizing to me is extremely toxic because it doesn't build towards anything. You just tear things down. And I came out of it just much more interested in promoting ideas and promoting people that I believe in and cheering for the success of others. So I think that definitely had a very, very huge impact in the way I create my content as a nuclear energy influencer. And as you see, like, I don't criticize other forms of energy. I just promote nuclear and I just promote the aspects that I find positive. And, for the people who criticize me and criticize my work, I kind of feel sorry for them, because if you're dedicating your limited amount of time in this planet to bring others down and to say some mean words on Twitter, it's kind of a waste of time and you're not building towards anything. And I would recommend you examine why you feel that impulse and just try to use that energy for something positive to create good in the world.
What advice would you give to maybe a teenager, someone in their early 20s who wants to have influence and have an impact in a specific area? What have you learned about influence in general and the ways that you create it?
Yeah, I think that it goes back to this point of just being optimistic about the future, being positive, working towards building something. Focus all of your time and all of your energy in the things that you care about and the things that you believe in, and on always building. Don't waste time tearing things down or criticizing, because you will end up just bitter and unfulfilled. So yeah, that's probably my biggest piece of advice to anyone.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I thought a good way to end off would be to lead people to your website, Isodope, so to let people know where they can follow you, and then also any resources that particularly stand out in your mind about the next things that people should look at if they're like myself and they want to learn more about nuclear energy.
Yeah, so my website is Isodope, isodope.com. And there I have some resources. I have to update it actually and add some more. There's this really cool YouTube video that came out yesterday actually by that big science channel that I can never pronounce. It's It starts with a K. Cougars, something.
I can link it in
I'll link
the
it to
description. Yeah.
Yes, we'll link it in the description. I don't know. They should change that name, by the way. Nobody can pronounce it. So I'll add. I have all the resources on my website, and yeah, you can go from there. It's just easier.
Well, thank you, Isabelle, for your time. I really do appreciate it, and I know you've obviously influenced me. I looked up one of the books that has really changed the way that I think about influence is this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And I pulled out a quote from it on influence, and it says, "The only way on earth to influence people is to talk about what they want and show them how to get it." So you've certainly framed nuclear energy in a way that is interesting to me. And at least as far as I've learned about it so far, it seems like something that I would want for my own future and for the future of other people's, to keep diving deeper into nuclear energy and keep seeing the potential that is there. So I know that your words will also have an impact on other people, and thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you so much. I truly enjoyed our conversation.